Hello, and thank you for coming along once again. This evening, we're going to look at the new scramble for Africa, the rise of and resistance to corporate land grabbing, and the AGRA meta narrative. This is part 6 of a series looking at the Green Revolution, its achievements, and its aftermath. We're going to look at the new scramble for Africa. Basically, there's a great deal of interest emerging around the world in creating new relationships with African countries. So that's going to be an aspect of it. And we're going to add to that the story of AGRA and the meta narrative that it has generated. AGRA stands for the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, or the other way around, the African Green Revolution Alliance. And its story is something they're quite proud of and talk about in terms of the march towards a green revolution in Africa. So that'll be a component of it. Is this part of the new scramble? Those who oppose this and who are presenting new kinds of evidence about agriculture in Africa include people like Vandana Shiva, who sees behind some of these efforts the part of multinational corporations like Monsanto to expand their control over the world's food supply, and particularly its plant genetic base. So she's going to be a voice as well. And we're going to look at the general trend that's now been identified and studied in a very important volume that came out just this last month called The Transnational Land Rush in Africa. So these are the themes, and in effect, they're the current chapters in the ongoing struggles that are taking place in Africa over the question of the future of African agriculture. You'll remember from our discussion previously that there is a kind of meta-narrative, a large-scale story that is being put forward by the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. The Alliance was created in 2006 with the goal of bringing high-yield agricultural practices to 30 million smallholder farmers throughout the continent. With the adoption of commercial seeds and inorganic fertilizer, AGRA set out to double crop productivity and incomes while halving food insecurity by the year 2020. As AGRA reaches its self-declared deadline, in fact, now has passed it, how well is it done in terms of increasing productivity, incomes, and food security? Well, we saw last time it hasn't done that well in terms of these goals. You can catch up with them on their YouTube channel. They have quite an effort to have a public posture here. And you can look it up under the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. Who is behind it? Well, we discussed this briefly last time. It's received roughly $1 billion in funding, two-thirds of it from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and dispersed more than $500 million in grants, mainly in 13 priority African countries. The Green Revolution Technology Campaign has been supported during this time by other international programs from Europe and the World Bank and the United States that were in fact far larger than AGRA itself, notably by the national governments in Africa itself, which have spent roughly $1 billion per year on programs that subsidize the purchase of commercial seeds and fertilizers. The key to this new alliance, the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, amounts to an alliance to distribute genetically modified seeds in some cases, in other cases, straightforward seed, and fertilizers that have been developed to increase the production of these special seeds. Now, we saw briefly how they presented their case last time, the AGRA story as it was called, and we can review just the beginning of it again.
My mother used to use this, and her mother. And before that, more mothers, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. It could have been the exact same one for all I know. People say Africa is a continent of tomorrow. To me, this seems a lot like yesterday. But it doesn't have to be this way. Farming can be more than an existence. It can be a business. We don't have to just survive. We can thrive. Follow me. Crops will always face danger from diseases. But these people are crop scientists. They work both here in the lab and outside in the field, looking for ways to make the seeds disease resistant. And our smarter farming doesn't always have to be so scientific. Look at this ugly thing. Cassava is an important crop, but once it's picked, you have 72 hours before it's useless. But this machine gives us time. Once it's chipped and dried, the cassava is good for 24 months. It means we no longer have to accept the price that someone will pay at the farm gate. We can control and manage the harvest. Now we can set the price.
Now we can set the price, she says. And if that were true, it would be very attractive. The trouble is, it's not altogether true. It rests upon a kind of narrative, a narrative that's a bit mythological. So it's worth looking at the premise and components of the AGRA meta-narrative about African agriculture. You'll remember that its components, traditional Africa agriculture, according to this meta-narrative, was not a business. As she put it, this seems a lot like yesterday, but it doesn't have to be this way. Farming can be more than an existence. It can be a business. We don't have to just survive. We can thrive. Well, you can find out more about the AGRA narrative about African agriculture on their own YouTube channel. It's pretty fanciful in many respects. Basically, it argues that prior to the arrival of science, there was no systematic agriculture in Africa. In fact, they're looking at the fact that it's only since this newly integrated, scientifically directed agriculture that things have started to happen. But we have to ask, what are decisions about what's to be grown and how it is to be grown? How are those decisions going to be made in this new system? Who has effective control in a circumstance like this with a scientifically directed agriculture? You see her in a lab suit there she's put on as she's walked in from the field. And there are as many people in this lab than are out in the field. It's pretty extraordinary, this new kind of meta-narrative about African agriculture. The showcase for the Green Revolution strategies were put forward in a project called the Bukanga-Lonzo project in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You can see from snapshots even what it's all about. They refer to it as un potentiel agricole exceptionnel. Bukanga-Lonzo sector. And then there's a big picture of a chemical truck bringing in pesticides and herbicides for use in this kind of agriculture.
La République démocratique du Congo possède 80 millions d'hectares de terres arables, dont 4 millions sont irrigables. Notre pays a un vaste réseau hydrographique et une diversité climatique offrant des conditions extraordinaires pour une grande variété de cultures. Nous disposons des ressources pastorales capables de supporter 40 millions de bovins et des ressources halieutiques pouvant permettre un approvisionnement annuel d'environ 700 000 tonnes de pêche. Nous avons de grands défis à relever.
Well, you can get the idea
Sécuriser et
here.
moderniser les
The
systèmes de
publicity
protection
about this is
agricole,
that there are
mobiliser des
vast new
investissements conséquents
resources
permettant la
available in the
modernisation du
Congo
pays,
that
vaincre la
need
malnutrition
only to be used with mechanical techniques
et réduire le
and
nombre de pauvreté de la population.
motorized
Notre pays
agriculture
a initié
that
une
can
lente
clear
modernisation
vast surfaces of land
portée par un secteur
and
agricole
create, in
dynamique et
effect,
augmenter les
new
productions à travers le monde.
industries
Nous avons mis en
based,
place
in
un
this
programme
case,
national d'investissement
on
agricole et
imported
d'innovation et qui met à
technology
disposition des innovateurs
for irrigation
producteurs, fournisseurs
of
et
lands in
producteurs
this area
d'interventions agricoles
where
pour transformer
new
durablement
quantities
ces
of
équipements de terre
foodstuffs can be
utilisés
grown
en exploitation agricole
not only
en
for the
utilisant
cities in
des
Africa,
vieilles
but
équipements existants.
potentially for export
Nous avons
to other
aussi mis en
parts of
place
the
un
world.
réseau national de parcs
It's
agroalimentaires
a kind of dream state of how you can put together pivot agricultural systems
notre projet.
to,
Une nouvelle
in
cité
effect, feed
agroécologique
the
de Bamako,
population more adequately
centre de
and
recherche,
develop
infrastructure
the
communautaire
kind of industrial
d'information et
agriculture
de
that's been
communication,
developed in the West,
électricité,
heavily
transport,
dependent
communication
on
électronique,
teams and teams of
collectivité
tractors,
alimentaire, sa chaîne de
all of
production
which have to, of
alimentaire
course,
à la
be
chaîne
obtained from
agroalimentaire.
abroad. None of them are
Hier,
produced
le chef
locally
de l'État, le président
in the
Joseph
Congo.
Kabila Kabange, a
But
modernisé le
everything is
système
presented as if
matérialisé par la
this is an
technologie.
unquestioned
L'agriculture a été
benefit
perfectionnée pour notre
for
indépendance alimentaire
the African
et
country
soutenir notre
concerned, in
développement
this case the
régional. Elle
Congo,
permet la création de
and that
milliers
new
d'emplois et le
forms of
bien-être de la population.
maize,
Avec le programme national
beef, cattle,
d'investissement agricole, nous faisons
pork,
du partenariat
all
public-privé
sorts of
clé dans la
grains
stratégie de développement
can be
durable.
grown on this new
Avec le
irrigated,
président Félix
irrigated
Antoine
soil
Tshisekedi, le temps est venu de
and
transformer l'agriculture
becomes
congolaise d'un
the
secteur de
new
subsistance en un
development goal,
indicateur de développement économique
as they
durable.
put it. Joseph Kabila Kabange said, basically, we can transform Congolese agriculture from a subsistence basis to one based on basically a model that can be a motor for economic development in a global context. This is the ideal. The Bukongo Lonzo project drew attention to itself because the Democratic Republic of the Congo thought it would be a great success. They gave it a lot of publicity, and in fact, it's worth looking at in detail for that reason. They had an admirable goal, and it was to secure the food well-being of the population, as they put it, bien-être alimentaire de la population. But after a few years' operation, when the ministers actually went out and inspected the operation, it was a deplorable failure, as they in fact called it. They came out there in their suits and tried to look at what was going on in the field, and they were shocked to find that, yes, the images from the archives had bountiful harvesting machines bringing in lots of surplus maize in this case, and wheat as well. But when they looked at the on-the-ground situation, there were thousands of pounds of unused agricultural inputs, including seeds and fertilizers. They were just sitting in sheds, rotting and deteriorating. And then there were the agricultural machinery brought in from abroad, from Massey Ferguson and other providers, um, that had never been used. Brand new machines that had never been used were just being kept in barns. And in fact, they were shocked, as they say. Sylvestre Ilunga s'étonne de l'état déplorable de ce parc industriel. And in fact, some of the machines were taken apart and the motors in them were used by local populations for other reasons altogether. So it's worth looking at the whole thing. Not surprisingly, as such a high profile project, Bukanga Lonzo attracted a lot of international attention. And for that reason, its assessments became public eventually, even though there was an attempt to keep them quiet for a while. The Bukanga Lonzo project was a large scale effort and a matter of great pride for the Congolese government.
This large-scale agricultural project is the first of its kind in Africa and was launched in February 2014. With this, the Democratic Republic of the Congo saw the development of its first agricultural business park at Bukanga Lonzo.
Now, it's important to look at the actual outcome. And a documentary has been put forward by one group analyzing what in fact happened at Bukanga Lonzo, entitled False Promises of Agro-Industrial Parks. The Bukanga Lonzo Agro-Industrial Park was conceived as a partnership. It's very interesting to see this, a partnership between the Congolese government and Africom Commodities, a South African company. Now, it's interesting, it's a South African agribusiness company, Africom, and in effect, they go into a bilateral agreement with the Congolese government. This is not an AGRA supported project by the Gates Foundation, but it is a demonstration of what they think biotechnology can do for African agriculture. It was to be a pilot project for 22 such parks in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Just the first of 22. It was ultimately driven by the World Bank and the African Development Bank. So it had some big financial support behind it, in addition to being a joint project between South Africa and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Banks designated the strategy for the agro-industrial parks, and they outlined it in great detail. They selected the sites and financed the feasibility and technical studies involved in implementing these plans, straight from the African Development Bank Group. 80,000 hectares designated for the park are on the ancestral lands of the Teke and Lonzo communities in the Congo. The African Development Bank said that local support for the Bukanga Lonzo was unanimous, according to their own documents. But, as the analysts point out, it was a lie. The interviews make it clear when the analysts started interviewing local chiefs. We were asked to give our land to the establishment as an agricultural village, said this chief. However, we never agreed to an agro-industrial park. It was called an agricultural village. That's what they agreed to, not an agro-industrial park. Now, it's interesting to listen to the way they're describing it in the official French language of the time, they were saying not only will this development empower many Congolese citizens by the creation of job opportunities, but the promises they made of jobs for the youth did not happen, according to this chief. When our youth went to apply for a job, they were arrested and beaten. The park created at most 500 jobs in an area where tens of thousands lived previously. Hundreds were fired for striking. Their complaints: unsafe work condition, lack of drinking water, and lack of housing. At least one worker died from injuries on the job. The park sprayed chemicals like glyphosate, a known carcinogen. These chemicals, like glyphosate, including glyphosate, drained into the people's drinking and bathing water supplies. Despite the costly farming equipment, the project failed to meet projected yields year after year. AFRICOM, the CEO, Christo Grobler, set up a mining venture on the territory that had been given him to look for diamonds and other minerals in the agro-industrial park. And in 2017, AFRICOM left the project and it was shut down, basically. But the Democratic Republic of the Congo government, the African Development Bank, and the World Bank continued to talk about this as a success project. And they still want to create 22 agro-industrial parks on the same failed model. The park wasn't just a failure because of corruption and poor management. It fundamentally ignored the needs and potential of local farmers. The time has come to transform Congolese agriculture from a subsistence sector to a powerful engine of global economic development, according to Joseph Kabila. Subsistence was the target, but most rural Congolese are not subsistence farmers. There were entrepreneurs who earned 97% of their income from selling their products in local and national markets. They need better infrastructure, access to credit and seed, and fair prices for their produce. In 2009, the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, released a comprehensive plan to help farmers improve their yields, incomes, and livelihoods. It was never implemented. Instead, the DRC embarked on a World Bank-sponsored agro-industrial park venture. Instead of financing the farmers, they financed the companies. The government should focus, according to this analysis, on real entrepreneurs, the DRC's farmers, not expatriate agro-industrial farm enterprises. What it amounted to was The analysis suggested that there were a whole lot of false promises. Similar to other projects in other parts of Africa, hundreds of millions of US dollars had been provided through the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa to selected African countries to promote high-yield seeds and petroleum-based fertilizer. In West Africa, hundreds of millions of US dollars provided through AGRA went to various countries like Mali, receiving 27.7 million, and to Ghana, receiving 74.4 million in subsidies to purchase these seeds and fertilizers. In East Africa, it was even more staggering. The total amounts in each country were larger, and places like Ethiopia received $34.2 million in subsidies, and Tanzania $77.1 million. When you add all these things up, you've got hundreds of millions of dollars being provided through the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, funded by the Gates Foundation, in order to promote the distribution of high-yield variety seeds and the petrochemicals necessary to keep them alive. This is why the analysis called it false promises, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Sadly, Africa is not the only location for investment in this kind of petro-intensive green revolution agriculture. Tragically, we are witnessing a global land grab, a movement throughout the world driven by high energy green revolution technology, a new kind of agriculture thought to follow on the tradition of Norman Borlaug. Take a look at how it became manifest in other parts of the world.
Dividing up the world's breadbasket, rich countries are racing to buy and lease agricultural land abroad and secure their food supplies for the future. Critics are calling it a colonial land grab.
The scale is something we've never seen before. I mean, there are huge pieces of land, 6 million acres in the Congo, bought by China to grow palm oil.
It's reported 40 million hectares of land has been bought or leased in $100 billion worth of deals. Now the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization is proposing a code of conduct to guide the global land grab.
Governments need to be much more assertive. At the moment they're signing away huge pieces of their territory for very little money and very few guarantees. The deals are secret, so if we had some more transparency, if you could see what the deals were, local people could do something about it and get a better deal.
Not only are wealthy companies directly buying and leasing land around the world, they've also started to form local partnerships with companies. And this is so they can get a direct stake in their agricultural industry. Now, one of the companies that's leading the way is actually right here in Qatar. Hassad Food is aiming to not only guarantee Qatar's food security, but become a global food supplier.
We are targeting crops and type of food. So, for instance, if we are talking about sugar, then it has to be in Latin America, precisely in Brazil, or it could be in India. If we are targeting wheat, then it has to be somewhere in Australia, or in Latin America, or in even Eastern Europe.
He says he doesn't know why some people are alarmed about their business.
I have no idea at all. But maybe the stereotype of the wealthy countries grabbing the feed from the poor countries.
From Sudan to Romania, anywhere that can grow food is now prime real estate, after governments were rocked by food riots last year. One of the most aggressive buyers has been Saudi Arabia. It's setting up a chain of 1,000 square kilometre farms abroad and plans to ship the food directly to the kingdom. And it seems food prices are about to go back up.
The food prices bottomed out in about March, and now they're going up. They're already to where they were in 2007. If you look at the graph, it's quite scary.
A global grab for land. The question is, will there be enough of it to go around? Nicole Johnston, Al Jazeera, Doha.
Devlin Kuyik is at the World Food Security Summit in Rome. He works for GRAIN, an international non-profit organization that supports small farmers. He says the problem of land grabbing has spiraled out of control.
some farmers organizations I've talked to have said, hey, if you're going to come in and negotiate a price and you want to purchase food from us, well, we're prepared to sit down at the table with you. But if you want to come in here and buy our farmland, control our farmland, and decide where that food is going to be going, there's no way. There's no way we're going to allow for that to happen. So of course, that's a better scenario what you've mentioned. But the reality is that the private investors these days are interested in taking control of the food system. We've identified about $100 billion now being mobilized to buy up farmland, okay, to invest in taking over farms. It's a major new trend. Everything we've heard here says that nobody is dealing with the importance of this issue, the significance of this issue. We're talking about vague codes of conduct that have no teeth. Nobody's addressing the fundamental problem, so it's no surprise that you're seeing countries taking these extreme measures and outsourcing their food production. Really, we have to start looking at how can we get support to farmers? How can small-scale farmers who make up 80% of those who are the hungry in the world today, 80% of that 1 billion who are in the hungry today are small farmers. How can we get support to them, to help them produce food, not only for their families and for the local communities, but there could be ways of producing more food globally. And that's a long-term scenario. I mean, this is long-term thinking.
One of the most dramatic examples in Africa comes from the case of the land rush in Ethiopia. It was reported on quite thoroughly by John Vidal, a very good reporter for the Guardian newspaper in England. Let's take a look.
This is Ethiopia, one of the hungriest countries in the world. But here, foreign companies are spending billions of dollars to grow food for export. An area the size of Britain has been handed over to corporations in the last 3 years. It's called a land rush. I'm in Ethiopia's remote southwest Gambela region to investigate claims that large numbers of small farmers are being moved off their land by the government. Now, all this land for the next hour of our driving is going to be some kind of farming, intensive industrial agriculture. We're driving west through Karaturi Farm, a new Indian venture, where large areas of forest are already being cleared to grow palm oil, rice and sugar. Are you going there? Hello. Hello. It will be one of the largest farms in Africa, but most of the food will be exported. Populations are growing, so this has to be good for the world. But what about Ethiopia's poor? The man in charge is Kamjit Shekon. So how big will this whole farm be?
Phase 1, 100,000 hectares.
After that?
After the second phase, 100,000 plus 200,000.
So 300,000 hectares. And if I started walking at one end, how long would it take me to get to the other end?
On 100,000 hectares is about 121 kilometers.
120 kilometers, that's 80, 90 miles.
90 miles.
That's big.
Yeah.
It's as big as Wales. So will you build a town just by here?
Yes. Do you see those trees?
Yes.
There will be the town, next camp coming up.
So that would be Camp 2, and that would be 10,000 people.
Maybe 10 to 15,000.
Karaturi says it will build home schools and clinics for as many as 60,000 workers. But on one of their other Ethiopian farms, similar promises made by the government have yet to be fulfilled. In addition, we found they pay most workers under $1 a day. That's well below what the World Bank says is extreme poverty. I think that because you were the first people here, you've got the best land. I think you've got the river access.
We never saw the land.
Yeah? Oh, you never saw it?
They gave it to us, we took it.
Seriously?
Seriously.
You did not even see it?
Yes.
They offered it to you?
They offered, that's all.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Razak.
This has to be the deal of the century. 1,000 square miles for just £150 a week. Plus, they get tax breaks and roads built for them by the government. Now, presumably, all the trees, all the forests which we see at the moment will have to come down, so you can plant it.
Yes.
Is that inevitable, or is that just...
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
You have to clear this. Then there has to be a road network for harvesting.
So it's very mechanized, it's very industrialized, it's very precise. Karaturi says their land was sparsely populated and denied displacing local villagers. On the way back to Gambela town, we passed a group of shacks along the side of the road, near where other foreign companies are moving in. This is Kami village, which we think is full of displaced people, but we'll see. Well, these people clearly haven't been here for very long. These are very rudimentary tents. Around 250 people have been living here for 8 months. Chief, thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you very much indeed. And most of the people here displaced from other areas. Why did they have to move? The government moved these people and told them they would get a health clinic, a school, as well as fresh drinking water. So far, only the foundations have been dug. Okay, these people are pastoralists. They're quite used to moving backwards and forwards across land. What they don't realize is this land may be taken away from them forever. That would be very different for them. I'm going to the state government to find out how many companies have come to Gambella. Hello, hello. And we want to know how many people will be affected by the land rush. We've got 3 maps here in the investment office. This is the extraordinary map because it shows that for the last, for 10 years, 12 years, there's been just about nothing. In 2007, it started going right up. Since then, there have been hundreds, and I've just been told that the total number of investors in Gambella region is 896. Now, that is an extraordinary figure from absolutely nothing only 10 years ago. Kasahun Zefu is one of the department's senior officials. What countries are they coming from?
India, Saudi Arabia, and China, and so forth.
Can you explain why you are relocating villages?
We relocate villagers to obtain clean water in one place, to obtain medical services.
So the 2 things are very separate. One is the relocation, the deliberate relocation of villages, and the second thing is the investment by the foreigners, and the 2 have no link whatever.
There is no link, yeah.
So it's a coincidence that the
Yeah.
villagers are relocating.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So the villagers, when they relocate, can they go back to their land?
No.
They can't go back to their land.
Yeah.
So
It
who
is because
takes
it
the
is
land?
voluntary relocation.
It's all voluntary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
why.
Kasahun said as many as 15,000 people are being moved, but at the same time, thousands of square miles is being cleared. Great swathes of Gambella are being ecologically devastated. Carbon emissions will rise and wildlife will vanish. I had been told about a village not far from the Karaturi farm that had been cleared just weeks ago. Actually, the whole of this was the village. So it's not just a few houses which we see left there. All of this was actually a village pretty recently. There's nothing left. They've all gone. And they've left the storage pots. We don't know the name of the village, but we do know that people were here about 5 months ago. Gambella is up for grabs, and foreign investors are not the only ones moving into the region. Wealthy Ethiopians from other parts of the country are also leasing huge areas of land. Okay, we've just stopped the car because we found a small group of people who may have something to say about the burning down of this forest. Many of the villagers we met were too scared to talk to us about what was happening. But one man was willing to speak on condition we disguised his identity. Have you tried to stop the bulldozers? Have you tried to stop them setting fire to the ground? The farmer told me he didn't want to move to a resettlement village. Will they have to forcibly evict you?
እሱ እንግዲህ ያው እኛ አንችልም። መንግስት ካሰበ በመሰረትና ሱቅ ካለ ምን እናደርጋለን? ብሶ እጂ እንግዲህ ያለን
The man was frightened of being beaten up by soldiers. Some farmers have reportedly disappeared or been killed for speaking out against the government.
Do you think you're in danger?
ታዲያ ለምን አልፈራም? ብዙ ከተናገርኩኝ ያስሮኛል፣ ወሴ ይመቱኛል። የሆነ ቦታ አርሼ ተነስ ካለኝማ በቃ ዝም ብዬ ምን መሄድ እንጂ ተፈለገ መንገድ ላይ ወስድ ልሞት።
Later that day we returned to Addis Ababa. Ethiopia's government is desperate for development and jobs for its growing population, and you can understand why it wants to attract foreign investment to a country that can't grow enough food for itself. But I still wasn't sure if the land rush in Gambella was in the people's best interests. I put what we'd seen in Gambella to the Minister for Agriculture, Wanda Radmandefro.
Minister, can you, when we were down there, we saw a lot of evidence of people having to move because of the investors moving into the area. Can you confirm that, please?
By the way, there is no movement of population.
Minister, with respect, we found many villagers who were frightened, who were worried, who had been told that they would have to move.
It's their choice, either to choose to have these basic services coming to the village, therefore it's based on their willingness. But of course, you know, they have to abandon their previous way of life. You cannot provide any basic services having highly scattered community.
So you have 3 million people, 2.9 million, 2.8 million, who this year will receive food aid from America, from Europe, from wherever, at the same time as you are trying to export large amounts of food and commodities to America and other countries. Is this not sort of rather complete madness?
You said madness, but it is not madness, and it's a correct way.
The government is saying that Ethiopia's poor will only become less reliant on aid if they give up their old way of life, and that large-scale industrial farming in places like Gambella is not just the future, but a development necessity.
We've just come out from the minister, and clearly he's hoping for an enormous increase in productivity in farming in Ethiopia. The danger, clearly, is that the companies take advantage of this, that they will grow what they want to grow, and they will sell it to whom they want to sell it, and the real benefit for Ethiopia will never be seen at all. And the real danger for Ethiopia is that they will have given away their land for next to nothing.
His reporting and the reporting of several other kinds of observations throughout Africa led to a series of studies that were put together by academics, and a publication of a book just last month in February of 2021 of a book entitled The Transnational Land Rush in Africa. A decade after the spike, a decade after it started, people started looking at its impact and what it meant for Africa. You can look at the table of contents and call up these chapter by chapter studies. They're pretty staggering when you look into it. Let's take a look. Here's the table of contents. And as you look at it, you can see that chapter after chapter is looking at these problems: agribusiness development in the Cameroons, colonial legacies and recent tensions. Then the faltering land rush and the limits to extractive capitalism in Senegal. Epilogue of a short-lived land rush, private, rural, and urban land tenure in southern Sudan. Behind accumulation and dispossession, state and large-scale agricultural land investments in Nigeria. Well, one after another, these chapters look into the disasters and, in effect, the collapse of this kind of petrochemical agriculture as well as examining some of the politics of land grabs and development contradictions in places like Zimbabwe. Well, these kinds of things brought the international attention to the issue. And that began to percolate down then to studies like these, written by Vandana Shiva, questioning who really feeds the world. If these agribusiness projects built on the Green Revolution technology aren't working, then shouldn't we ask, who really feeds the world? As she titled it in her book, looking at the failures of agribusiness and the promise of agroecology, contrasting one with the other. Failure of the Green Revolution agribusiness and the promise of what she calls agroecology. This then raises the question about the future. Not who really feeds the world just now, but who will feed the world? Will it be the Green Revolution technology developed initially by Norman Borlaug and pursued with the support of the Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and other enthusiasts of the Green Revolution? Or will it be agroecology? As she puts it, the failures of agribusiness are evident, but the promise of agroecology looks more hopeful from her perspective. She points out, as others have as well, that replacing hunger with malnutrition is not really a good idea. In fact, a former UN official called it an example of the failing African Green Revolution. Others have looked at the fact that Africa really is at a crossroads and it's time to abandon the failing Green Revolution. Again, failure of agribusiness, but the promise of agroecology. A new focus on what really makes plants grow and who makes them grow. Once again, agricultural revolution. The article here emphasizes that the Gates Foundation is leading Africa to failure because of the failure of agribusinesses and the need to promote the promise of agroecology. Basically, it raises the question of when big pharma buys big ag, it leads to even bigger pharma, in a new sense of the word, pharma, with potentially fatal ecological consequences. This is what's happened. The chemical company Bayer, pharmaceutical firm, has bought Monsanto. And according to some, two deadly corporations now become one. Large concentrations of wealth can't help but produce large ecological problems. Monsanto has been characterized as the company that owns the world's food supply. It owns the patents on much of the world's seed crops. These trends have been provoked on a worldwide basis, and for that reason, they provoked a counter reaction to reject big pharma and its approach to global agriculture in the future. Vandana Shiva has gotten out in front and makes the case that Bill Gates is continuing the work of Monsanto, underscoring and keeping in prominent position the subsidies that need to be made in order to sell Monsanto's chemicals and seeds to the world.
Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. My guest today is Vandana Shiva. She is a world-famous environmental activist from India. She's a laureate of the Alternative Nobel Prize in 1993. She's author of numerous books. Her latest is called Oneness versus 1%. Thank you very much for being on the France.
My pleasure. But when Bill Gates pours money into Africa for feeding the poor in Africa and preventing famine, what's he doing? He's pushing the failed green revolution. He's pushing chemicals, pushing GMOs, pushing patents, and now pushing new...
Knowingly, or he thinks it's a good thing and he may be wrong?
Well,
it's not the same thing.
There's enough evidence of what it does. There are enough letters to him from farmers of Africa, from governments of Africa to say, this is not the way to go. The United Nations accepts agroecology, working with ecological systems, as the best way to go. Now, Bill Gates is trying very hard to shift the patenting issue now to digital. So you just take a genomic map and you say, my invention, you don't create a seed. Seed is self-organized, self-making, and evolution in continuity. Just by making a map, a genome, and you have no idea what the seed does. And this is something he's pushing very, very hard. My book records how he financed DivSeek. I've talked about how he's pirated seeds we have saved that tolerate salt and floods. And he says invention. This biopiracy is a bit like Columbus, where Columbus is supposed to have discovered America when he basically went as a pirate. Why do I call him today's Columbus? Because he's carving out new colonies. Software should have stayed open software.
So you say he has a strategy, a nefarious strategy, what you describe as philanthrocapitalism, is a nefarious enterprise. And so you're not saying he's using the wrong methods, he's pursuing a wrong goal with self-interest. You also attack Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, saying they're all linked together. I mean, this reeks a bit of conspiracy theory, doesn't it?
Well, you know, my book is based on the new evidence that's coming out. All you have to do is see the ownership, and I have data in the book on how there's common ownership. We stopped Mark Zuckerberg from trying to get into Indian agriculture. It was a big mobilization of people who believe in the open internet.
What did he want to do?
Well, you know, basically what they do is they mine the data from the farmers. And right now, all over the world, there's new debates on privacy issues, on the data mining. There's new books, a new form of capitalism, which is surveillance capitalism, where you basically have turned human beings into your new raw material. So Bill Gates does both. He takes living resources and our seeds and biodiversity, mines it into data and wants ownership, along with his friends. And Mark Zuckerberg mines your data and your behaviors and turns it into the raw material, both of corporate world for selling things, which is why strange advertisements pop up after you've sent a message to a friend, and manipulating elections. I have a chapter in the book on the hijack of democracy. You have enough data on what happened with Facebook selling data to Cambridge Analytica and how we are popping up with artificial intelligence leaders. This is a major threat to democracy.
So this is why you're calling them billionaire dictators, because you think they're not helping democracy, but actually threatening and even killing it? I mean, isn't this too much?
No, I have grown up in an India that was post-independence. I've grown up in an India that had absolutely no corporations. I've grown up in an India where democracy works. And therefore, when I see the imposition of digital transactions and criminalization of cash between poor people, I basically see this as a dictatorship. I call it digital dictatorship.
But she's come out arguing that, in effect, it's very destructive to the ecology of agriculture around the world and needs to be protected against, the world needs to be protected against the destructive impact of billionaires like this who are pushing petro-intensive agriculture. She's made the case not to the American press or the Canadian press, or for that matter, the Australian press, three of the biggest agricultural exporters in the world, but the French have picked it up. You can see from this interview, it's really quite critical. In the United States, the initial book called One Earth, One Humanity versus the 1% is published under the title Oneness versus the 1%. Same subtitle and same introduction. Shattering illusions, seeding freedom.
When I watch, not just in India, but in Africa and other parts of the world, now that we have the data that is showing that native seeds have more nutrition, they produce more food, they have no cost because you don't have to use chemicals, that local biodiversity is the way to feeding the world, in spite of all that evidence, in spite of the evidence in the United Nations, in the FAO, in UNCTAD, every agency, Bill Gates is still imposing and forcing GMOs, which is a failed enterprise. And he's not just imposing GMOs, he's taking what has failed and rejected by governments. My government threw the BT aubergine of Monsanto out. Bill Gates resurrects it in Bangladesh. We rejected the golden rice for solving the problem of blindness. He finances it to continue through Philippines. So he's taking all the failed projects with the wrong thinking that life is like a word program and can be chopped and cut and pasted, when it's an amazing complexity of self-organization, and scientists call it autopoiesis, self-organization, writing your own poetry. That's what life does. He is absolutely ignoring all of this new knowledge that new science is giving us and imposing a failed technology with a huge cost to the planet, only so there can be monopolies and people and farmers aren't free to have their seed.
Vandana Shiva, obviously you have strong views and we're happy that you were able to share them with us. Thank you very much for watching this interview here on France 24.
Well, the strategies of the Green Revolution have been promoted by the Gates Foundation in Africa through the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. But the criticism has been pretty vociferous, especially from Vandana Shiva and others who have looked at the action of the AGRA projects on the ground. In a recent book that she just published called Oneness versus the 1%, this is in fact made very clear that we need to, in a sense, shatter the illusions of the Green Revolution and seed a new kind of freedom, the oneness of humanity against the 1% that own the petrochemical inputs to agriculture. The Norman Borlaug solutions of the Green Revolution are not adequate for what's needed. And in fact, articles have begun to appear pointing out that the Gates Foundation is leading Africa to failure by promoting programs like AGRA and the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. This has become dramatically apparent in other parts of the world as well. Perhaps first, Indian farmers have been holding months of protests against the new agricultural laws that are being imposed by their government to favor the Green Revolution approach and the expansion of the rights of corporations rather than small farmers. Dr. Vandana Shiva has made it very clear that the Indian farmers are a victim of a new kind of food imperialism that's being thrust upon them and passed by their own government under the Modi administration to try to facilitate the expansion of this kind of destructive petro-intensive agriculture. Even U.S. farmers, especially family farmers, have come out in support of the Indian farmers' protest against their own government's policies. And it's not confined to the tens of thousands, indeed hundreds of thousands of farmers in India who are protesting. In fact, the vulnerability of the petrochemical approach has been underscored in Mexico itself, where the Green Revolution got started with the work of Dr. Norman Borlaug. The U.S. grown corn, we're told, threatens Mexican crop heritage. The reason for this is that by monocropping large surfaces with genetically modified corn species, they're displacing local varieties that, in effect, were in use by peasant farmers for thousands of years and were the basis of the agriculture in Mayan civilization, Mexican civilization, right up through to the colonial and post-colonial moments. Mexican farmers are protesting the entrance of genetically modified organisms in the form of corn. GMO corn, they argue, will wipe out the genetic variety upon which they have based their agriculture for thousands of years. They brought pressure on the government, and in fact, the government has moved to ban the destructive pesticides and GM corn. This presidential decree comes despite intense pressure from the industry and from U.S. authorities, according to the Institute for Agricultural and Trade Policy, the IATP. In fact, the agro-industrial model derived from the Norman Borlaug Green Revolution technology is now being rejected around the world in country after country that has active farmers' movements. In its place, the holistic sciences of agroecology based on an integrated, restorative, and sustainable agriculture are being adopted for future development. So when we ask, how could something so right turn out wrong? How could something so good go bad? Well, the new scramble for Africa, the rise of and resistance to corporate land grabbing and the AGRA meta-narrative have made it apparent. In this part 6 of the series, you can understand why Africa is so important in some respects. There is a new scramble for territory in Africa. It's now not on the part of European governments carving out areas as it was in the 19th century, but it's corporations trying to do land deals. It's called land grabbing or the land rush in some circles. That, in effect, has been undertaken by corporations to pursue the march towards a green revolution. This is the AGRA story, as they put it. The Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa story has been to promote this kind of agriculture, green revolution agriculture based on modified seeds and subsidies for petro-intensive fertilizer. This has all been opposed by those looking at the structure of this kind of agriculture and looking at its impact on a global basis in promoting the interests of groups like Monsanto, who themselves have been bought up by pharmaceutical firms and petrochemical companies. The opposition has been led by Vandana Shiva certainly in reference to the Indian subcontinent, but now on a global basis as well, because of what's been happening in the transnational land rush in Africa. The documented cases make it clear that this is an extraordinary process that's being forwarded and championed by the Gates Foundation and their extension of the Green Revolution for Africa through the alliance that they fund. These then are the current chapters in ongoing struggles in African agriculture. But we should recognize that these current struggles in African agriculture are bringing the entire world closer to seeing the urgency of devising a solar sustainable, restorative agriculture for the global food system.